Hello, and welcome to the third ever episode of The Stew, the show where we talk about meaningful pieces of media we've consumed in the past month. If you'd like to share your thoughts about anything we talk about or future things that we'll talk about, please go ahead and comment in the description, check out the Discord channel, or the Patreon. For any Patreon subscribers, thank you all so much for helping me with the show, and you'll get extended looks and interviews with all the guests on the show. September has been a really busy month for me, so let's go ahead and start with talking about the first piece of media, Signalis. Now, Signalis is a horror video game that released in 2022. And joining me to talk about this game is one of my good friends, Matthew, who is also a game developer in charge of CurlyGoblinGames. And we'll be talking about spoilers for the game, so be warned. I'm going to start with the initial question I'm going to always start out with is just, what did Signalis mean to you, and what did you really like about it?
Playing something like Signalis and seeing how cool, like these like small team, low budget games can be, it was kind of like a morale booster in some sense. I felt more convinced that games can have a ton of heart without requiring these like huge budget major project goals that a lot of modern games have. Like Red Dead Redemption is, I think, the game I like to beat up the most because like I have major problems with Red Dead Redemption 2 to be specific. That's a game I really like to point at and be like, look at the problems this game has. And just something of that like magnitude and scale is supposed to evoke this like massive narrative journey for the player, and I think it's super cool to see people do that in a fraction of the time. And it's cool to just see the kind of like cool creative ideas that can come out of these smaller projects. So for me, what really stood out a lot was just the like details. So like the game design details. Like I really love the puzzle creation in a lot of parts of it. Like it was very reminiscent of like early Resident Evil, where you look at the item that you have, turn it around, manipulate it. Are we fine with like spoilery stuff in this?
Yeah,
Or are we
absolutely.
yeah. I really love the like X-ray puzzle they had. That one was so cool. There's the things in there where I'm just like, I think like my answer is just like part of my projections was just like looking at things and going like, oh my god, that's so much work that they had to do. Like I can see the like labor involved for making like every puzzle have its own unique personality, and I really like that a lot. That stood out to me pretty significantly. It was just the sort of attention to detail the game had with its design choices, because having to go through the work of create like an X-ray shader, having, the sine wave puzzles, like all these different puzzles are like fundamentally different scripts, different design problems, different programming problems, different, performance problems. Like there's so many different things you have to deal with, and that commitment to that was really cool.
Yeah, I really like your input because like I am not a game developer, and it's just so interesting because I do play this game and I recognize like, oh, Rose Engine, and I see like, oh, it's like just two people essentially.
Right.
And I'm like, oh my god, two people made this game? That
Yeah.
feels like such a mountain to climb. Even like someone who's not involved in game development, which is me, like when they see something like this, which I would consider it a work of art, it's like, wow, like just two people created this whole thing. Like it kept me going for like 9 hours of my time too. It's like, that's pretty incredible. And I don't know all the fine details, but I just know like Signalis is such a stylized game. I mean, just the opening cutscene, I was like blown away. I was like, what the heck is this? Like it draws you in so much, which it's also super cryptic, which
Very.
we can talk about. But it was just like, this is made so well. And then just figuring out like only two people did it, I was like, wow, that's very impressive. These two people created a whole work of art that people just cherish, and that speaks a lot to me because though I'm not in game development, I do love stories, and I want to create stories, and I want to write my own book and everything like that too. So it's
Right.
seeing that is like, I get the same feeling that you do. It's just like, it's so reassuring that something can mean so much to other people and also be considered like such a great piece of work with
Right.
like compared to Red Dead Redemption 2, which had so many people working on it. This one just only had basically two.
It's crazy for me. It's more like the context of like the time we're in, where like the game industry has so much potential where we have the highest access to like game engines we've ever had. We've had the best access to tools, best access to learning that we've ever had. But then it's also like the hardest time in the industry in a long time, you know.
Yeah.
And so that's like where my leap was coming from, is like it's so cool to see, these like diamonds, kind of like sparkling in this like environment where like everything is like extremely, it's really hard to like succeed in video games right now. It's the easiest it's ever been to make video games, but it's actually very hard to succeed in it at the moment.
Yeah.
And that's where like games like Red Dead 2 are kind of like one direction games have gone, where you have these like gigantic, hyper realistic, takes 8 years to make video games, versus these like smaller scale games that have just like impeccable like artistic visions. They know what they want to do. That's when you start to realize like the little detail doesn't have to be like, does the sweat on your horse show up in Red Dead 2?
Mhm.
Like that actually is like less impressive to me than just, even just like having the characters like eyes moving in like the main menu, and like the
Yeah.
stylization of all UI, like everything is so like realized that it's super impressive.
Yeah. No, 100%. Yeah. And the idea like that a game can take 8 years to make, it's like not many of us have 8 years worth of time where we can just fully invest all of our time into making something. And I'm sure like
Yeah.
you feel that way too. It's like you're torn between like your actual job that pays the bills and trying to create something. It's tough, it's like, but you really want to create, you really want to go and do these things that you kind of been dreaming about for your entire life. So
Yeah.
seeing sort of those smaller projects succeed is really nice. But I did want to touch on one aspect that you mentioned earlier, is you talked about like the nods to like Resident Evil, and
Hmm.
obviously like there's so many things that Signalis references, such as like
Yeah.
Silent Hill, and
Right.
there's the book in the game, which I think is called The King in Yellow, which was also a
Right.
play that I had no idea that was an actual thing. But I think when you describe like some of these smaller projects succeeding in this industry where things are oversaturated now, and it's really easy compared to like 20 years ago to make a game, it's really telling like when things become really successful is because there's a lot of passion built in it,
Yeah.
and a lot of inspiration from many different sources that contribute essentially to someone's entire life. Because when I see Signalis, I see like everything that influenced the creators comes to light there. Like there's so many animations that are referenced to other
Right.
things. Like I think there's one Ghost in the Shell animation that they remade in the game and
Oh,
stuff like
totally.
that.
Yeah. The like arm snap
Yeah,
scene.
the
Yeah.
blowing off the arm. Yeah, all those things are like so cool, and they're like such nods, and it just like as a creator, it just reminds me like at one hand like you can't create anything that's like completely never been created before, but you can take everything that you've like absorbed in your life and just put your own spin on it and create something that is not completely new, but it is completely you, you know?
Right.
And that's what's so cool. And I think like that's one of the things that I really took away from Signalis, is just like you see so much about what it's inspired by, yet it stands on its own 2 feet, and left me with such an impact that like after finishing it, I watched like 4 hours worth of video essays just
Oh, damn.
describing the
Yeah.
game. And
Yeah. Cool.
I was like, oh man, like it eats in me. Like I want to know more, and I want to like understand, and seeing all like these references and things like that.
Mm.
It's a game that I finished and started thinking about and can't stop thinking about it.
Right.
So
Yeah. No, that's super cool. Yeah. I agree with you fundamentally about it. Trying to create something new is in my eyes like kind of like you're kind of like dooming yourself to like disappointing yourself. Whereas if you think about how much you care about other things, it could be from music, plays, video games, those inspirations will inspire you to create something that is like a reflection of yourself more than trying to create something totally new. Like, I mean, like, quick example, like Balatro, that's poker, but with a name with a spin. Like he didn't invent poker,
Yeah.
And then yeah, like I it's funny that you brought up like taking something and then like giving it your own spin and making your own, like something that is just like was on my mind. I was like literally listening to the song recently, is this Brazilian song called Masquinada. And like the super super famous version isn't even the original. Like the
Mhm.
original song was written by Jorge Ben in like 1963, and then Sergio Mendes, who passed away very recently, like did his own sort of like bossa, like no, like samba jazzy spin a few years later in '66, and then that became like one of the most iconic Brazilian songs of all time. And it was just like, again, like that kind of someone taking something that inspired them, giving it their own spin, can be some of the coolest thing that you can do. So that's sort of like, if you look at and talk to like any director, writer, game designer, whoever they are in any medium, whether it's a song in Brazil, whether it's a video game that you care about a lot, like there's always going to be something that you can look at and reference.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. Like I feel like if you just dive into anything, you can really see like all the influences and inspirations that whatever piece of media you're looking at takes from.
And it's very like reciprocal too. Like there's no way that like the Mario team is not playing Celeste and like not playing these other indie games. Like they're clearly playing those and then giving their own spin, and or it's like inspiring them to create their own sort of design goals that they have for their new Mario game.
Yeah.
Everybody is looking at everyone else. Like if you when you talk to game designers, they're always like enamored with other game designers. Like it's
Yeah.
it's pretty rare for a game designer to think like they're the best,
Yeah.
and they know what is correct.
Yeah. No, definitely. Like, and I think that's just something that Signalis just teaches me. It's just like there's so many things to experience, and no matter what it is, like you're gonna take your own spin on it, because finishing
Hmm.
Signalis was like, wow, like this was amazing. And though personally the combat and the mechanics reminiscent to Resident Evil were pretty frustrating at many
Mm,
times for me,
right. Yeah.
because I've tried the original Resident Evil and I'm like it just gets frustrating at certain times because games nowadays, like the movement is much more fluid and much more responsive.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's that sort of charm that you won't get in modern day games unless they go for a very specific style, which Signalis
Yeah.
did. But it's just seeing how Signalis's story unraveled really influenced like my own thought process, and I was like, oh my god, I want to create something like this hauntingly beautiful, because the overall story. How did you feel with playing the game and learning the story through the game?
Yeah, so like before I think about the story too much,
Hmm.
I'll talk about like the gameplay that you brought up. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I think they did a good job of like kind of having it be a very strong nod to like the old school Resident Evil sort of controls, while also I think they like modernized it enough where it didn't feel like too clunky. But
Hmm.
it just like every horror game, they always have this like problem where you figure out like, oh, this is how I cheese it. Where you
Yeah.
go like, okay, like if I just like run against the wall, I can avoid half of the enemies in this room. Like, and then like the kind of fear factor just immediately plummets, and you realize like, okay, now that I understand that this like squiggly like flesh monster is basically just walking in a very clear line at me, that I just don't I stay out of that line and I'm good. And then you end up in these weird situations where when you make the commitment to use your ammo, you're like, okay, now that I need ammo, I'm really low on it, or
Yeah.
like you have too much ammo and nothing is threatening you. So it's just like I think horror is an interesting genre because like, yeah, the gameplay, like there's arguments that like the clunkiness of the gameplay highlights the fact that you're sort of like cyborg and maybe you are clunky. Maybe like your
Mm.
motor functions are like there's so many ways to like justify the controls in a horror game,
Yeah.
purely from a thematic reason or a gameplay reason. But it did fall into the same trap that I think most horror games do fall into, of like there's a point where like the game can be cheesed really hard.
Yeah.
So that was one takeaway I had from like the core gameplay of it. Is like at the end of the game, I was really playing for the story at that point more than I was playing for the gameplay, I would say.
Yeah.
Like the puzzles were always cool, but then yeah, that was kind of like the story and the puzzles were what I was really looking forward to at that point.
Yeah. Honestly, same. There was points where I was like, "Oh, there's a new puzzle." And I'm like, "Oh, this is interesting. I actually like doing the puzzles instead of like
Yeah,
constantly running through like the same room trying to avoid them because there's a ton
yeah,
of backtracking. And since most
yeah,
of the puzzles required you to like put in like 6 objects and you only had 6 spots in your inventory, it was like,
yeah,
okay, let me like I can't hold my gun and all six
yeah,
things at the same time. So I those things got tedious, but coming to those
yeah,
new puzzles, I was like, oh, okay. And like I had just finished like a real in-person escape room too. And
yeah.
I was like, man, I miss doing escape rooms. And playing Signalis was like, this is really fun. I just like doing puzzles.
Yeah, yeah. It's like almost like playing an escape room in a way
Yeah.
too. Yeah, no, I agree. I think like it did get tedious at the end. Like I think it's hard to make horror games, and so that's why
Yeah.
it's just like Signalis does such a good job with like the atmosphere and everything that like you do forgive it. But there is a point where like I do think like maybe there's always this pressure to like ramp up the game like when you're towards the end, right? But like
Mhm.
I almost feel like the game would have like been more enjoyable with like less enemies at the end instead of like adding more enemies, because there is so much back and forth. Like I had way more fun doing the puzzles than I did fighting the enemies. Like
Yeah.
the enemies fight kind of just felt like a deterrent and like we're just kind of in the way at the end more than they felt like a genuine threat like they did in the beginning. In the beginning, you're kind of like every horror game goes through this where you're in the beginning, you're like, what is this? How do I defeat them? Can I defeat them? What do I do? That's why like games like Amnesia kind of approached it very differently, where they're like, you just can't kill the monster, you have to run. Which was an interesting solution. Whereas like when you do have these situations where you've got a gun and you can fight back, there's a point where just the monsters are really just more annoying than they are like
Yeah.
actually engaging. I would agree that like towards the end, it did feel like a little bit tedious for me. So like when you do blow your arm off and have to do sections again, I was just like, do I have to
Yeah.
do this again? Do I really?
Yeah.
So I honestly like I had a hard time like kind of getting through the last act, to be honest, because of that.
I had actually the inverse scenario because
Mm,
when I had started the game, because it's survival horror and you only have a limited amount of ammo, I
yeah,
was avoiding every single enemy as much as I could. Like the first sort of section where there's enemies just walking around like the hallways,
yeah,
immediately avoided them like the plague. And I mean, they did have a plague, but it was just so annoying to me because I would have to backtrack to so many of those areas and I never killed any of those enemies. So every single
yeah.
time I'd be like, let's avoid them. Let's avoid them. And then all of a sudden I would do the thing because like when I play survival horrors, I need to be like a perfectionist
Hmm.
and it's just my personality and I'll shoot, an enemy like 3 times and then stomp him and I'll be like, okay, I could have done that in two. I know I could have done that in two. Let me reload the save and then I
Hmm.
would do that. So I would conserve as much as I could because I know I will need it later. So then when I got to the sort of later parts, I had a lot of extra ammo.
Right.
And I was frustrated with the game, so I actually turned down the difficulty from normal to like the easier mode. And I was like, oh my god, this feels so much better because now I've got a ton of ammo. Now
Yeah.
there's tons of enemies. And now I have, like, I'm really close to the end. So let me just blast through every single enemy. And it felt so
Right.
satisfying to just be like,
Yeah.
finally, now I can just like let loose.
Yeah. 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 That's really like that is sort of the answer some horror games have. Like even like if you look at some of the more modern Resident Evil games, even the old ones, like they're like here's a flamethrower, they're just
Yeah.
like, or here's like a bazooka. Like you get some sort of like emotional payoff for getting that far in the game, where like you've got all the ammo in the world now, versus like the like 12 hours of like holding on to a clip, like a half empty clip, and like trying to deal with that. I ultimately like I think Signalis is great. I did get a bit frustrated at the end with the sort of tediousness of the
Yeah.
overall playthrough. Like there were some like cracks in the general gameplay sort of structure that really show up at the end when you've done it for enough hours. There needed to be like a gameplay transition as well. Like the story transitioned at that point to like a big reveal, and there needed
Yeah.
to be like a sort of like gameplay reveal too, which
Hmm.
is like Some games do that. Like one that I can think of off the top of my head is like in Skies of Arcadia, your ship gets blown up, and so then like you get this sort of like gameplay step up where you get a new ship, right? And it's a cooler, bigger, like there's more mechanics now. Like you get like a mechanic upgrade, like even if it's like one new mechanic, the mechanic upgrade feels like progress in a like swamp of tedium. You know what I mean? So like
Yeah.
even if it was just like two more inventory slots, like she gets like a vest at the end. Like what if that let you carry more items? Like something that just kind of gives you that gameplay like little upgrade that like helps you get through, like you're pretty much playing the same loop over and over again, and like you need that sort of payoff right at the end. I think Signalis kind of needed that right at
Yeah.
the end there, where like there's just to make it feel a little bit more less of a grind right at the last couple hours.
Yeah. I would agree. I would agree. I feel like the only, gameplay updates that they do is they give you new guns, and these guns are
Yeah.
like far superior most of the time to your previous
Yeah, and
ones.
they're kind of like the same gun, just better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that would have helped a lot with the tediousness. I tell you, like
Yeah.
changing the difficulty, because I think I was on Act 3 when
Yeah.
I changed the difficulty, and it did wonders. I think it gave me that sort of mechanic boost that you were looking
Yeah.
for,
Yeah.
because I was like, oh, now I can actually play it less, scare city mindset type
Yeah, yeah,
gameplay.
yeah.
So yeah, no, I would agree. It it was a struggle to get through. It was definitely tedious in many parts.
Yeah, and it sounds like I'm really like hating on the game, but I'm not. I respect the game significantly, and so that's why I'm like picking at it and like, what if right now this conversation is inspiration for my own horror game in the future? Like
Yeah.
what would I do? Like those kind of things. Like if I'm actually digesting and consuming this game, that means it was good.
Yeah.
Like it was a great game if I'm actually thinking about it this hard.
Yeah, and that we made it to the end of the game, like that's
Yeah,
a huge huge sign of something is actually worth your time because you
yeah,
spent time on it. And in today's like world, and plus now like getting older, I'm like my time is less and less than I had before, and I
yeah.
really need to be smart with my time. So when I play something that really speaks to me, I'm going to finish it. So Signalis was that type of game.
Getting back to the story stuff, I did really like the sort of crypticness of the story in the game because it like horror games being cryptic is like that's I don't know too much about the King in Yellow, so I'm curious what you found out about that. I didn't look it up, so I just immediately made the assumption it was a sort of like Lovecraftian nod. Like there's like I forget what it's called. There's like an entity called I think the Yellow King or something like that,
Oh.
and it's like another like cosmic horror madness entity kind of thing. So yeah, I'm curious. What did you find out about it?
Honestly, if people are looking for sort of the answers to everything, I would go with people who've done like extensive video essays and
Yeah,
analysis on these things, and just don't take my word for it because I'm going to butcher it. But the King in Yellow book slash play, what I understood, and I might be also completely wrong, was it was a collection of stories that once you went through the stories, you were insane at that point. So as
okay,
you go through it, which I don't know what the stories are, I didn't look that deeply into it, but it was just a collection of stories that the further you went into it, the more insane you would become. And
gotcha.
in Signalis, the book actually, like the multiple times it shows up, shows like parts of the book has been read or whatever, like
Right,
certain segments. So by the end of it, like that's supposed to signify like you've gone insane type thing.
right.
So
Gotcha.
that was just one nod to something else that I was like, wow, I had no idea. I was like, I don't know what this book is. Here it is again.
Cool. Yeah, that's cool. Okay. Yeah, I didn't know that. My assumption was like kind of halfway there, I guess. Just like that, there was some nod, obviously, to like the idea of like madness going
Yeah.
on. But yeah, I guess from what I understand, like the connection there is like there's the main character and so there's like the human and the cyborg that are the main characters. It's
Yeah.
like Irene, right? I think,
Oh,
and
Ariane.
then Ariane. Okay, and then what is the robot's name? Like Ulster.
Elster. Elster. Yeah.
Elster. Okay, so Ariane and Elster. Like my like throughout the story, it's because it's clear there's some like fogginess about like who is who's real, who's not real. It's unclear like where you are sometimes, if you're in a dream or if you're not in a dream.
Yeah.
And then that all kind of, as you get further into the game, starts to become clear that like the answer about are you in a dream or not in a dream is like kind of the answer is kind of both, right? Like there is like a reality that like Elster is like navigating through, but in some sense, Ariane is like kind of like telepathically connected to everything in a way.
Yeah.
She's basically having this like death throes like fever dream where she's like recreating her like robot that is trying to like fulfill this promise they have together, which also like helps explain why there's like so many dead bodies of like yourself Elster in the
Yeah.
game as well too. That like there's been this just like cyclical process that's been continuously happening over and over and over and over again. And it seems like part of the reason why the world is so messed up is like Ariane's ability to kind of like alter the world.
Hmm.
Like she's basically like dying, and like like everything's kind of like reflecting her deterioration, like the idea of like everything turning into these like monstrous cyborgs. Like for me, I interpreted that as there's like a very clear idea with Elster, whereas like everything else is like kind of like when you have a dream, you can have those dreams where you're like talking to someone and then they become someone else, and then
Mm.
you don't know what their face looked like, you can't remember details, like everything becomes so blurry and messy that like her impact on everything else is blurry and messy, whereas like there is like a very distinct clear memory and goal with Elster. So that's my interpretation, is not so much that there's like a cosmic horror happening so much, but like Ariane's ability to like control her environment gets really deteriorated and messy and out of control basically with everything else besides Elster.
Yeah. I mean, you bring up a good point too, because it's like the story doesn't have. I think the creators themselves said like there's no definitive ending that's like the good ending or the bad ending. It's just
Sure.
they're all endings. And the idea of like everything can be interpreted in different ways because this story is very cryptic. It's not really
Yeah.
spelled out at all. So whatever you take away with it is honestly valid. And one of the
Yeah.
reasons like you bring up a good point. I never thought of that. I also thought of like, since Ariane is dying because they were sent on this Penrose mission and like that was a suicide mission at that point.
Right.
It was like, oh, she's sort of dying, and one of the reasons why a lot of gory things happen is because like those are like her body cells like
Mm.
dying and like
Right.
mutating and like cancerous
Right.
growths happening and stuff like
Right.
that.
Sure. Yeah.
So there's so many ways that you can like understand it.
Yeah.
I do want to ask though, like, what ending did you get when you finished the game?
So my ending was I watched a YouTube video of the promise ending. Actually, I actually didn't beat the final boss. I like got to that and then just kind of stopped.
Oh,
I that's where like the tediousness of the last gameplay made me go like I'm cool just watching it. I don't need to go through this whole fight.
interesting.
So I actually was like pretty bored with the combat system at the end. And so then I just like went, I'll just watch it. I got here. But like the answer is I did do the promise ending if I actually literally played it.
Yeah, the boss, when I fought the boss, I didn't realize that the spears were like I have to like, stab them with the spear.
Right.
I was
Right.
like,
Yeah.
she's down, and I was unloading
Yeah.
all of my bullets, and
Yeah.
then I was like,
Yeah.
I have nothing. So then I
Yeah.
had to like redo the boss fight because I didn't realize that
Yeah.
you have to do that. But yeah, I think the promise ending is the one where Elster lays there and she's like, "Can I stay with you longer?" Or
Yeah. The promise ending, from what I understand, is effectively Elster gets there, effectively pulls the plug, and they just both finally die, and it's over. As far as I can tell, like the cycle has ended,
hmm,
and Ariane is able to like finally get that like relief from like the pain and everything, and her ask of Elster was always like I just want to just like die peacefully,
yeah,
at this point, like it's over.
yeah. Okay, then I did
Um,
not get that ending. I forgot which one.
no.
No, I got
Oh,
the
okay.
the middle
Yeah.
one because
Yeah.
there's the three endings and then the other alternative ending. It's the first
Yeah.
one is like Elster doesn't go to Ariane. She goes to like
Yeah.
her home planet or is like wandering and stuff. And it's
Okay.
because Elster is remembering the memories of the other person.
Right.
And so that's where she goes home. And that's how it ends. The one
Yeah.
that you're talking about is Elster doesn't really remember the other person that she's modeled after because she's a robot.
Gotcha.
She
Right.
remembers her life as
Right.
Elster with Ariane,
Right.
so she pulls the plug. I got the middle road where it was like you go to Ariane, but you don't remember exactly what the promise was. So you just lay there and just that's pretty much it. And so
Gotcha.
that ending for me was like super unsatisfying, which
Yeah.
because I was like, this is very tragic. She's like, can I just stay
Yeah.
with you a little bit longer? And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's so sad. Why are the
Yeah.
credits rolling? What was the promise? I don't. So I was like, it was that really cryptic idea where I was like, I don't know exactly. And the ending changes how you play the game. So
Yeah.
it was like I need to go see the rest of the endings and I need to understand what I just played because I left the game with understanding probably like 50% of it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's like another thing that we haven't talked about too is like they bring up that one painting all the time in the game too. Like
Oh,
it's that with the cypress trees in it. It's like the Island of Death, or right, something
yeah,
like that. I forgot what the
something.
exact name of the painting is.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I never really figured out exactly what that was supposed to represent in the game. There obviously the theme of death and that painting existing, there's a clear connection, but having like the red door sort of like in that as well too, or like, I mean, it wasn't a door, but it was like the red like kind of
Like the
rectangle,
keyhole, I think too.
the key, yeah, the keyhole, like that also just kind of, it felt like, I mean, you can already see where my imagination is going. It felt like a doorway as well too. And then
Oh,
when you get into that one phase right before you go to the ship and blow your arms up, like you're in that like red landscape with a sort of gateway as well too. There's just like a lot of like symbolisms of like the doorway to death, in that game, I feel like.
oh, yeah. No, that's a good point. Yeah, I watched those video essays, and I will tell you, like, I left understanding those paintings.
Hmm.
And like 20 minutes later, I was like, I can't tell you what those paintings were referencing anymore. Like, there's so much
Yeah.
information about the game that I learned in the 4 hours that I watched all these video essays. And I was like, oh crap, I can't understand every single thing because there's just so much to it.
Yeah. I've always noticed because like I think I forgot when's like the first time I've seen someone like really use it super well, but like I love when like whether it's like in film or video games where people like use doorways like or like kind
Mm,
of keyholes, like something in a very like with like a really distinct purpose or like identity as like a portal, you know what I mean? So like in Signalis, like there's when you're like it's when you're talking to the director when he's got like the knife in his eye, like that's
yeah,
that like red landscape with this like big portal looking
yeah.
kind of like there's like a doorway there at the top of the stairs that like kind of leads to nowhere. And like, it could be that connection to red. Red is just everywhere in this game, like that very distinct red. There's like this very like kind of connection between like and then the red landscape around the ship and the nowhere land as well too.
Yeah.
Like this red feels like almost like the color of this portal into this in between world that maybe I don't know where it is, but like obviously whatever her like kind of like psychic powers like maybe this is like almost like the center of the star, the core of or, whatever it is, this red
Mm,
is this portal. I don't know, I have no idea, but like
yeah.
I love that sort of sense of like once you've stepped through this doorway things change,
Yeah.
like you're no longer in the same place. And I
Yeah.
think Signalis like does that quite a bit, even with like yeah we've got our Silent Hill trope of jumping into holes quite a few times as well
Yeah.
too, you know.
Yeah. Looking in mirrors too.
Again, another portal, like the idea of like you've crossed a boundary and you're no longer where you should be in a way, you know.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's a great point. What a visually striking game. Because you
Yeah.
mentioning all that red, like, man, playing that game, it's like so engrossing watching those cutscenes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I the game is absolutely gorgeous. And like I also like another callback reference is like the way they handle eyes, like the Blade Runner esque,
Mm,
like orange reflection in the eyes. Like they've got the like android kind of eye reflection thing going on all the time. Like there's so many like beautiful details in the game that like it's immediately just like engrossing as soon as you get to like the main menu is already so cool. It's just like opening up the game for the first time, you're like, oh, this is gonna be good. Like just like there's already so much like ambiance and detail just starting up the game.
yeah. Yeah. And then that fake ending too in the middle of the game where
Hmm.
the eye is just dead in the main menu. You're
Yeah.
like, holy smokes. Like, it's so striking.
this game is 10 out of 10 when it comes to details. Like the
Yeah.
idea of like you've literally opened up the menu over and over again. You're so used to this, and then that's where it's just like I feel like kind of going back, like they do this. The story notes are always happening. That's where like I do wish there was like a little bit of like a gameplay upgrade that happened at the end, because like you're right, like moments like the eyes being still and dead in the main menu are so memorable. It's
Mm.
such a like distinct memory.
I think you put up a great point. I didn't even think about that with Signalis. I think Signalis would have benefited greatly with some sort of gameplay shift.
Yeah, I think it's like for me it's like a little bit of a shame that it didn't happen, because I think the game has such a like intriguing world and story, and like the puzzles are so cool and everything, but it's just like like the closest thing to a shift is the sort of fake out ending, you know.
Yeah.
And like at the end of the day, like this is still like a heck of an achievement. Like
Yeah.
making a video game with two people is still incredibly hard. And like maybe they wanted to, but just ran out of time. It's like you have no idea
Yeah.
like how much you can like how far you can push something sometimes when you're making a game. And like it might have just been like we need to get this out the door. We can't spend another year on this. Like there's so many things that can like whether it's like a movie, a game, it's just like even if it's two developers, like who's their publisher, how much money do they have, how much time do they have? Like there's certain points where it's just like you start to have to make compromises with stuff, and ultimately like they got the core beats into the game, and they got the story that I think they wanted to tell out there. But I bet like it's one of those things where if they had like a little bit more time they could
Mhm.
have added in something like that.
Yeah.
But it's hard to know.
It's also hard to
Yeah.
decide when you should be done with a project and move on to other things, or you should
Yeah.
continue to work on the project. And I think that's
Yeah.
a very fine line. That's
Yeah. That's where it's just like coming back to like what's so cool about Signalis being such a small team. It's just like I really hope that we are moving towards like some sort of direction where just like smaller scale, smaller budget, smaller like time cycle stuff becomes more like
yeah.
realistic, because at least for the industry's like patterns, because like yeah, these gigantic like 8-year long dev cycle games are just like it's too much, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. And especially when people like blaze through a game in like a weekend too. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, you spent like 10 years, 8 years making Red Dead Redemption 2, and this one person decided to take a whole week off and played it nonstop, and they're done. It was a week of their life. Sure, it was a fantastic week. It's a fantastic game, but it's like, yeah, it's a lot of money, a lot of
Yeah,
investment, a lot of
it
things.
is.
So
Yeah.
I agree with you. I do love that Signalis wasn't as long as like a 20-hour game, but it could have shrunk in certain aspects, but I think it was a good size. Like jumping in and playing something for 40 hours plus feels like,
Hmm.
oh, it's a gauntlet to
Yeah.
overcome. Like it's like this
Yeah.
is this is gonna be rough to go through
Yeah.
the entirety. Not saying that it's not possible, but
Sure.
I look at like I played Disco Elysium and that took me like 20 hours to beat.
Mm.
And that was still a gauntlet. Even though like
Yeah.
it was essentially just a book, because it's a CRPG where
Yeah.
combat doesn't really exist and
Yeah.
it's just all dialogue choices. But it was like
Yeah.
20 hours. Man, if I wanted to do another playthrough or something like that, that's another 20 hours ish
Yeah.
on top of that. So
Yeah.
it's just so much.
Yeah. I mean, like, look at Elden Ring. That's like a 100
Yeah.
hour gameplay game. And you're like, look, your second time, you can do it in 20. You're like, okay. Yeah. So
Yeah.
20 more hours.
Yeah.
But I did it. I did it still. It was good. I mean, I have my own like game design. Like, I created my own like game design like problem from that one that I call like the goblin theory of Elden Ring. Is like Elden Ring is so well designed that that's almost a problem. Like that, when you're in hour 85 and another catacombs goblin jumps on your back and stabs you, you're like, stop it. Like, please stop. Like like it's like the problem of like having every dungeon be meticulously designed by somebody with a very like great game designer background and skill level, is that like you're constantly getting dark souled, like you're just always experiencing the pain and the agony that Miyazaki loves. And like, like normally when you play a Dark Souls game, like it's over within like 20 to 40 hours. And so like you're like, okay, that was a gauntlet, but I accepted the challenge, right?
Yeah.
But then like Elden Ring, because it is like 3 times longer than most of their games, there's a point where you're just like, I'm so sick of getting jumped by goblins, that it's an interesting thing where it's just like the game is like, I think like basically a masterpiece and is like gonna have the influence that like something like Ocarina of Time had for like
Yeah.
younger kids. Like for me, when I first came out of like Kakariko Woods and like Ocarina of Time and saw Hyrule, I was like, oh my God, we are living in the future, and like,
Yeah.
that's how kids feel when they play Breath of the Wild or Elden Ring at this point. These
Yeah.
games are just going to be like massive influences for people.
100%. I mean, like playing Elden Ring, I had the exact same feeling. I went to the edge of the map and then the map expanded and I was like, holy crap, there's more. So
Yeah.
that was just such a
And then the
great
first
feeling.
time you take an elevator and realize there's an entire
Oh
underground
yeah.
world, you're like, oh, no way.
There's
Yeah, that,
just
that
so
was
much
like
more.
that was for me the most shocking moment in the game was like going underground and then seeing like an entire like city skyline, and then you open your map and there's a whole new map and you're just like, holy cow, dude.
Yeah.
Like this is crazy,
Yeah. Same with like Tears of the Kingdom too that just released last
Yeah,
year.
I know.
It's like
Yeah.
going underground now and in the sky and
Yeah.
it's like, "Oh my god,
Yeah.
there's so many levels to it."
Yeah.
Yeah, it's insane. And I think it sets a huge precedent which again for these companies that have so much resources that they can pour into that, they're going to love doing something huge and expansive. But for those smaller
Yeah.
devs, they're going to be influenced in certain ways. So I'm excited. In like 5 years, I'm excited. What games we're gonna get? It's gonna be crazy. Gonna be crazy.
Yeah. No, it is cool. And that's where it's just like I do think too is just like really like important thing to point out too is just like part of the reason why I think Tears of the Kingdom and like Elden Ring feel so good is like these are companies that have like invested and retained in their employees as well too, and like there's a lot of reusing assets. Like there's so much of like the stuff in Elden Ring that is just like this is the same animation as an enemy from like Dark Souls 3.
Yeah.
Like that ability to like grow as a company and grow as a team and just continue to like iterate on the ideas you had before is like same even Baldur's Gate 3 too. Like Larian, had a team make, Divine Divinity, Divine Divinity 2. They get into Baldur's Gate 3 and these are people who have now like 10 plus years of experience and know how to make an RPG. You've got the Zelda team, you've got FromSoft's Souls team. Like these people have been working together for a long time and like know how to like they basically have had 10 years to like continue their iterations and just work on these things to like
Mm.
already have systems in place. And that helps so much.
Yeah. That's a great point. And the way that the industry is going with the amount of layoffs and company closures,
Yeah.
it's you're gonna miss out on so many things like the next Zelda or like the next FromSoft game because those people have been laid off and now they're working with different teams, different on different projects. Everything has changed and they can't perfect their craft because they have to change so much to just survive or just to land that job.
Yeah. And that's where it's just like game design is a super iterative process. Like it's important, like it's better to make 3 games over 8 years than it is to make 1 game over 8 years.
Yeah. But now I want to transition over to your game. And
I realized a few years ago that I wanted to, I've always like been sort of like a more like thoughtful participant about games. Like I've always like played games and thought about like what game designers were thinking and like thought about the impact of games. And I've always like, followed journalists and like what, listen to GDC talks. I've always been like a very like active participant in games. And a few years ago I decided like, okay, I really want to actually I've always wanted to and I really want to make sure I start making games. And so I started learning like Unity and C Sharp. And I started doing game jams. And so yeah, I've landed here where in January I started working on my first like full release, which was taking one of my game jams and then transforming that and developing it further into something fully like realized, which the game jam was a dungeon crawler jam in 2023. And the requirements of that jam was that it had to be first person, it had to be grid movement. So like the classic like wizardry style of like, moving one space at a time, these like hard like 90-degree turns, and having these sort of like grid-based layouts. And yeah, at the time I was playing a lot of board games with friends, and trick-taking games were really, really popular at the moment. And so I was really inspired to, come up with my own trick-taking game to resolve the combat system. And so that's where I am now, is I am working on a dungeon crawler that uses trick-taking to resolve combat.
Okay. And the name of the game is Dual
Yeah.
Eclipse.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about like releasing it for Steam Fest? How has that been going? How is like, the
Sure.
timeline when people can download it? All the
Yeah.
information about it.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, the game is Dual Eclipse, and so to explain the name of the game, the trick taking. So trick taking is like card game, where usually you have like a winner or a loser of a trick, and a trick is normally people play a certain amount of cards, and you determine a winner or a loser of that trick. And so in my game, there's a duality of how you can win a trick. So underneath the sun, high cards will win a trick, and underneath a moon, low cards will win a trick. So that's where the name comes in and ties into the gameplay. And yeah, I started development back in January. I did a bunch of work this year so that I can make it into the October Steam Next Fest. So I did all the work I had to do this year to get my Steam page set up. I've been working on my demo that's up now, but the whole goal was to be part of Next Fest this year. And so that's going to be from October 14th to the 21st. The demo is playable now, and feedback is super appreciated, but the goal is to have it out there and get people to try it a lot and provide a lot of feedback in October so that I can improve the game before it releases. So one of the cool things that happened this year is you also can create like standalone demo pages on Steam now.
Hmm.
So people can actually like leave reviews on the demo as well.
Oh, well, that's
So that's a
cool.
really new feature. Is in the past with Steam, your demo was always sort of like a button you pressed on the main page, like download the demo, try the demo. Whereas now you have a fully standalone page, and that will always link to your main game. A wish listing from the demo, wish list your main game, right? Like
Oh,
it basically, the whole goal of it is to still fundamentally like encourage people towards the full release. But what's cool about it is like now if you go on Steam, there's like a free tab underneath the trending stuff. It's called trending
yeah, yeah, yeah.
free. So like you can see demos there now,
Okay.
and people can leave reviews. So if someone played the game, they could write a review on the actual demo Steam page, and I would see that, and I could always work with the feedback I get from it from there.
Yeah, I mean, that's really exciting. I like that they implemented all those little intricacies to really get, independent game developers more eyes on their stuff too. And I gotta say, Matthew, I really like the game. You
Thank
know,
you.
I did the trailer for it. So if you do watch the trailer
Yeah.
on the demo page or the Steam page, it'll be the trailer that I did. And that was a great opportunity. I love doing it. And I gotta say,
Yeah, thank you so much. It's so cool. Like that trailer is so perfect. And like it does such a good job of like trying to like explain like what the game is about.
thank you. Thank you. I know that I have so much video editing experience. So it's finally fun to put it on a project that is not my own.
Mm.
So that's really fun. It's really fun to make the trailer. And the quality of life updates that you've added to the game like are so great. I know that
Oh, thank you.
I
Yeah.
like from when I first played it to when I recently played it this past week, I was like blown away. I was like, "Oh my God, this is like so much better." And I feel like the
Yeah, thank you.
like
Yeah.
not that it was originally
No,
bad,
no, no.
but
Yeah, totally.
it
Yeah.
was like, "Oh my God, like I get to choose which card I get to upgrade now."
Yeah.
And I'm
Like, wait,
like,
this is a video game. This
"Yeah,
is a real game. Yeah.
yeah." And like the beginning wall of text where you explain the story and stuff, and I was like,
Yeah.
"Whoa, oh my God,
Yeah.
like it's all coming together." And
Yeah.
like I only see the sort of like the only downside that I see is that there's not enough of it.
Right.
Like if you were to flesh it out to be a full fleshed out game, like I know that it's so it got so much promise.
Hmm.
And just seeing you create this has been like, oh, this is amazing because I know you've been developing games for quite some time now and learning and everything, and it's just like amazing to watch your growth. And
Yeah, thank you.
it's so cool, and I'm like, I'm wishing you a ton of success with this one, and
Thank you.
I'll be first in line for every single thing that you do after.
Cool, thanks. I appreciate that so much. Yeah, you've had the like uncle experience where you like get to see your like nephew grow up in spurts.
Yeah.
It's just like it's like, oh my god, you grew up in a year. That
Yeah.
kind of experience with the game.
I think you have a gem of a game, and I
Thank
really
you.
am excited to see what happens. And for anyone who's watching right now, please feel free to check out the Steam page. I will link the Steam page in the description so you can go check it out right now.
Cool. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the demo, like if folks want to play it now, they can, but like the best version of the demo will be by the 14th for sure. So if you want to hold out, you'll have a better version to play then.
All right.
But yeah, feedback appreciated.
Sounds good. So thank you so much, Matthew, for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I will go ahead and edit this video, put it out. I will most likely have a shortened version on YouTube where it's covering the main points of Signalis and main points of Dual Eclipse. And then for those who, follow me and subscribe on Patreon, it'll be the whole conversation.
Cool. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it,
Okay.
Tor.
The next piece of media that I had the absolute joy to play this month was Astro Bot. So this is a brand new game coming to the PS5 earlier this month in September, and it was an extreme blast to play. Many people are comparing it to the likes of Mario or any other wonderful 3D platformers. But what really stood out to me is just how much it celebrates the legacy of PlayStation. I think that's what really means a lot to me, because if you look at many different platformers, they're often self-contained. Like look at Hat in Time. Everything about A Hat in Time is wonderful and gorgeous, but very focused in on itself. Astro Bot, with its abundance of fun levels and absolutely cute and adorable animations, is filled with such a love for all things PlayStation. You start the whole game in a ship that is a PlayStation 5. Your whole goal, similarly to the Astro's Playroom demo, is collect pieces of the PlayStation and get them working to assemble your ship. Everything about this game is really heartwarming and really cute, like adorable. But what really speaks to me is how much they can celebrate all of these other genres in video games. Because when I think about it, just like Signalis, our inspirations pull from so many parts about our lives. And seeing every part of PlayStation sort of history, whether it's directly involved in a PlayStation exclusive like The Last of Us, or side adjacent like things like Resident Evil. It's so wonderful to see them being celebrated in such a way, because those franchises and those pieces of media have made up such a rich history of PlayStation games. So much so that it is essentially on the same par as Super Smash Bros. For the Nintendo series. Seeing all those characters in Super Smash Bros. Makes me extremely happy. And seeing all those stickers and trophies and everything else about it is such a heartwarming letter to video games. And I think that's something we need to champion, because nowadays, video game development and the history of video games are often seen as negatives, with so many layoffs, so much economic difficulties for so many companies, so many startups failing, so many games still being put out there despite these economic troubles is so heartwarming. And we need to celebrate that. And playing Astro Bot was a wonderful way to say, hey, I love these games and I love what they've created. And I love that they've become a part of me and they've become a part of our stew. So I really, really love playing the game, and I love seeing all the characters. One thing, though, that if you didn't grow up with all these characters and you don't understand all the references, which I'll be honest, I didn't, Astro Bot is very funnily cryptic. Just like cryptic in terms of Signalis, it is cryptic in the way that it doesn't tell you where these characters exactly come from. For example, if you find a little bot and he's got a cute outfit on and you're like, what is that from? I don't know where that's from. It doesn't really tell you. It says something like random dude or something like alpha male. And you're like, what? That's funny. That's Chris Redfield. But it doesn't tell you in the moment. You kind of need to know where they're coming from. You can't just place all these characters in the game and go like, look at that one. That one's wearing an outfit that you don't understand and you don't understand the reference. Because these games have made up a huge portion of my life. And to be honest, they've made me into who I am today. And I celebrate video games and I love playing video games. I love the expansive stories that they all tell. And if we don't celebrate those stories, if we let those stories just crumble to dust, then we're doing a disservice to all the stories that could impact and affect and influence and shape so many people, including myself. So Astro Bot, definitely one of the best games of the year. Absolutely joy to play, and the platforming is gorgeous. The gameplay is so gorgeous. Everything is so gorgeous in the game, and I'm excited to just play. Because that's what Astro Bot is. Besides being a celebration, it is just pure fun. And I think in troubling times that we are in today and with so many problems, it's fun to just have fun. And it's really nice to just enjoy that experience that Astro Bot provides. It's a wonderful game. One of the best of the year. The last thing that I want to talk to you all about today is a movie called The Boy and the Heron. This is the latest movie by Hayao Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli. And to be honest, watching that movie, for some reason, just like Signalis, it was incredibly cryptic. I know Studio Ghibli films always have a hidden meaning where it's not necessarily always hidden, but it has a deeper meaning associated with all of the movies, such as Spirited Away. Spirited Away isn't just a story about a little girl who gets separated from her parents and now she has to work and save them. It's still a message about capitalism. But The Boy and the Heron was a movie that confused me a lot, especially because it felt oftentimes very random. And it was only until the last act of the movie that I truly understood what was exactly trying to be said. Spoilers for The Boy and the Heron. Throughout the movie, there's a whole narrative of losing his mother and wanting to be with his mother again. So much so that his new stepmother, which is his aunt, which is very weird, just sort of further implements that idea that the mother is very absent in Mahito's life, but is still so present. And by the end of the movie, he recognizes that even though his mother is gone, she's not entirely gone. And what is left is the suffering, the grief, and the loss that he has. But the ultimate point of the movie is that he can't reject that feeling. He can't just ignore everything about the world and about the suffering that the world has and the malice towards things. Because if he just wanted to retreat into sort of this perfect, idyllic world, that doesn't really exist. Because malice exists within everything, even ourselves, which is why he hits himself in the head in the beginning of the movie. Everything about the movie shows you that things that are really simple, many of times our birds, are often creatures that are not perfect. And in the movie, they're showcased as sort of monsters. But they're not monsters. They're just, nothing about our world is entirely perfect. And if we want to retreat into a world that is perfect, we will be left empty-handed because there is no world that is perfect. Even all the worlds in The Boy and the Heron that are shown with those doors, nothing about them is perfect. And no one can create a world where perfection exists in our plane of existence. And we have to accept the loss and the malice that we experience in this world as they create us into who we are. The animation of the movie was absolutely gorgeous. I mean, Studio Ghibli never disappoints, and I haven't seen all of their movies, but it was just so nice to see such a beautifully crafted movie. And everything that I've talked about today, from Signalis to Astro Bot to The Boy and the Heron, are all visual delights, and they are a feast for the eyes. I absolutely love every single one of these pieces of media, and they will all stick with me in different ways. So there you have it. That's all the things that I'm going to talk about in the month of September. Let me know what you thought about all of these things that I talked about, and if you want to get involved in future shows, go ahead and check out the Discord and the Patreon. Thank you all so much for watching. Again, your support means everything to me, and I really hope you enjoy this show. I hope you all have a wonderful October, and I will see you all next month.